Resolved, that woman is man's equal, was intended to be so by the Creator, and the highest good of race demands that she should be recognized as such. Resolved, that the women of this country ought to be enlightened in regard to the laws under which they live, that they may no longer publish their degradation by declaring themselves satisfied with their present position, nor their ignorance, by asserting that they have all the rights they want. My name is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and that was an excerpt from my original document, the Declaration of Sentiments. Now, before I explain that document's importance, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm sure some of you may know that I was a prominent figure in the women's suffrage. The women's suffrage movement was the struggle to gain women's rights in America, specifically the right to vote in democratic elections. The United States Congress passed the 19th Amendment, which guaranteed white women the right to vote in democratic elections on June 4th, 1919, and ratified that amendment over a year later on August 20th, 1920. That means that this year, 2020, marks the 100th anniversary of white women gaining the right to vote. In America, we have continually failed to address the fact that Stanton did not fight for the rights of all women. While she did make great strides for the women's suffrage movement, Stanton actually fought against the right to vote for people of color across America. Women of color would not even gain this same right until the 1960s. Today, I am here to tell you about my lifelong contribution to this movement. I was born in 1815 in Johnstown, New York. My father, Daniel Cady, was a lawyer and state assemblyman. While growing up and watching him work, I learned a great deal about our nation's laws and developed a passion for women's rights at a very early age. My parents sent me to excellent schools. They, unlike many people in my lifetime, understood the value of a woman's education. By 1840, I had graduated secondary school and fallen in love with a man named Cady Stanton. We married later that year. Henry and I were abolitionists, and we fought for equal rights side by side. Soon after our marriage, I began working with some of the most prominent figures in the abolitionist movement, like Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman. Now, it may be confusing to hear Stanton call herself an abolitionist. Many historians believe that she considered herself an abolitionist because she fought to end slavery. While it is true that Stanton did publicly advocate for the 13th Amendment, in the end, Stanton only fought for the right to vote for white, middle-class women. Once the 13th Amendment was ratified, Stanton no longer fought for the rights of former slaves. For our honeymoon, Henry and I attended the World Anti-Slavery Convention, where I met Lucretia Mott. Lucretia and I immediately connected. We both recognized the lack of female representation at the convention, so we decided to do something about it. It was and still is known as the Seneca Falls Convention. It was held in, you guessed it, Seneca Falls, New York. The convention lasted 2 days, and I led it along with Lucretia. This is where the Declaration of Sentiments was publicly declared for the first time. This document added the words woman, women, she, and her to the Declaration of Independence. In short, it argued that women should be given all of the same rights as men, and that the United States government should recognize and dismantle its patriarchal foundation. Women were often denied the chance to speak during this time in history. So this convention allowed us to openly discuss our role in society. We even held classes on law, educating women across the state about the laws that existed against them. From this day forward, I would completely dedicate my life to the suffrage movement. It is true that women of color were not excluded from the Seneca Falls Convention. It wasn't until much later in Stanton's career, after the Civil War, that she began to separate from her black colleagues and fellow activists over their disagreements regarding the rights of black people in America. 3 years later, I met a woman named Susan B. Anthony, who some of you may have heard of before. Susan and I shared the same tenacity for this movement. The two of us led the suffrage movement for the next several decades, writing books and articles and giving speeches as we traveled the nation together. As Susan and I gained popularity, we decided to form our own women's rights organization called the National Women's Suffrage Association. I became the president of this association and wrote for its newspaper called The Revolution. Because of this, I was now a well-known political and social commentator, a job that was unheard of for women to have. Throughout our success, I was also building a family with Henry. I gave birth to 7 beautiful children. Now, this meant that I couldn't travel as much as Susan, so I ended up writing speeches for her as she made her way across the country. This is where Stanton's views really began to shift. After the Civil War, Stanton and Anthony both publicly opposed the 14th and 15th Amendments, which guaranteed voting rights to black men. They used racist language in their arguments. Stanton said things like, virtuous, educated white women are more deserving of the vote. She even referred to black men as degraded and questioned what wealthy, educated white women might suffer if black men gained the right to vote. Racist comments like these, among others, are what turned many off to Stanton and Anthony. No longer championing equal rights the way she had once claimed to, Stanton is now said to have sacrificed the black vote for the white, middle-class female vote. With the help of well-known suffragette Matilda Joslyn Gage, Susan and I wrote 3 volumes of a book titled The History of Women's Suffrage. These 3 volumes featured the stories of local women that we worked alongside and for each and every day. My final advocacy project was a book titled The Woman's Bible, which intertwined the ideas of religion and feminism. As a religious woman myself, I understood that many women felt that their religions meant that they couldn't fight for their rights. But I challenged this idea and spoke out against the injustices I saw every day in the religious institutions. I died before I got the chance to see white women gain the right to vote in America. On October 26, 1902, I passed away in my home. I would forever be known as one of the most prominent figures in the women's suffrage movement in American history. While it is important to recognize the contributions that Stanton has made to women's suffrage, it is vital that we acknowledge and teach both Stan and Anthony's well-documented bigotry. This movement is not just defined by these women. I would encourage you to go home and to read more about Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, Nannie Helen Burroughs, Dr. Mabel Ping Hua Lee, and so many more activists who fought for the right to vote for all American women.